Welcome to Brightly, You Radiant Being, the show that wildly recognizes, encourages, and invests in the radiance we all carry so you can shine your brightest. Each episode, we used our good and bad experiences, friendship, and passions to inspire thought provoking conversation and soul driven advice. This season, we'll travel from the fool's journey to the hero's adventure to better help you create a life worth living and step more brightly into yourself, inch by inch.
Hey there, Tracy.
Hi, Amy.
How you doing?
I've gone back to the beginning again, as we usually do whenever we read our little intro there.
Yeah.
So I think you brought this up a few episodes, so forgive me for copying you, but I really got struck by the more brightly into yourself piece.
Yeah.
And there's something you shared that your husband said to you many moons ago, many episodes ago, that I think about like every day. Would you like to hear it?
Yeah.
So you said something or you shared that he said something along the lines of like, why do you keep changing you? I like you.
Oh,
Do you
know what he
remember that?
said? Yes, he said, "Why do you want to improve yourself?"
Yes.
Yeah, why do you want to improve yourself? I like you just the way you are.
I,
Yeah.
and so that has stuck with me, and especially as we talk about like this hero's journey, right?
Mhm.
And as we talk about in our intro, stepping more brightly into yourself. And I was like, are you improving yourself? Are you changing yourself? Or are you stepping into your further into yourself?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Because I think I spent so much time not there, where it was almost like I spent so much time scrabbling out of that space just for safety. And I don't mean like physical safety, but I mean like, oh, so I can have friends. And so, like, other people like me and they don't think I'm too much, or I don't come across this way, or whatever. And so it felt like it was just like it wasn't safe, right? It just didn't feel safe. And I feel like absolutely that's it. You hit it on the head. I'm not improving myself. I'm just trying to get back to myself,
Oh,
trying
and I
to
love
get,
that because I was just going to ask, like, in terms of stepping into yourself, are you stepping back into you or are you stepping towards yourself? And it sounds like
oh,
you knew what you had awareness that you were not who you were, right? That you had
yes.
moved away from it for preservation, right?
Yeah.
Whereas I feel like the opposite, where I prevented myself from being it. And so now I feel
Oh.
like for me, I'm walking towards it for the first time.
Okay. So it doesn't have to be one or the other. It's very much individualized to your experience,
I
right?
mean, someone could be doing both, right? I mean, like you
Right.
said, I
Yeah.
mean, you jumped ahead so prophetically and profoundly with what you shared there, but what is self, right? Like and you said it was preservation, it was friendship, it was having a job, living in civilization, probably other roles you play in your life, like being a mom, right? Like,
Yeah. Because I feel like there are times that I think it's sort of going back to like that whole wild woman type of archetype, where I think that there was a point in my life that I could have just full blown been that person, been
mm,
that wild woman, like living in some kind of hut out in the woods, picking, foraging for food, and screaming, at the moon, or howling at the moon, or whatever. And so I do feel like I wonder if that's in everyone, that wildness that just is like, okay, let me out for a little bit. I don't know. But yeah, I think that was always in me. Now, granted, I realize it's just it's hard to live like that when you have family and children and, obligations. You can't do that to the extent that maybe you'd want to. And maybe I wouldn't really want to do that. Honestly, I like a nice warm bed. I do like that. I like a dishwasher. So there
You
is
contain
that.
multitudes.
Yeah.
You are both the wild woman and the civilized lady, right?
Exactly. The moon card, right? It's the moon card.
Ooh, say more.
Absolutely. Well, the moon card depicts the wolf on one side of the road and the domesticated dog on the other side of the road. And it's just to show that we have both of those inside of us. We're both domesticated and wild. And you have to you have to be like the alchemist and
Mm.
combine them together to be the whole you, the true you. And so I think what happened is the domesticated animal just took over. They're just driving the little car, right? Yeah, and the wolf is like hanging on for dear life from
I love
the
how you are
trunk.
like, it's such a generational and like socioeconomic and just way of phrasing it, because you're like wild woman, domesticated woman, whereas like isn't there that rap song where like I want a lady in the streets but a freak in the sheets, right? Like, and it's the same concept, right? Like everybody wants people to contain multitudes in the appropriate settings. And
Right.
like,
And I don't think I want to do that in the appropriate settings. I think if I
and
feel like
are you honoring yourself and truly being yourself if it's only in prescribed social situations?
exactly,
I
exactly.
so one of the most difficult questions I've ever been asked, and I recently had to ask it of someone else, and it's always the most difficult question when I'm helping people prepare for interviews. Can you guess what it is?
No.
Amy, tell me about yourself. It. And depending on the context in which you're being asked, you can give grossly different answers,
So
right?
do you know what I always go to when I hear that
What
question?
do you go
I
to?
go immediately to Beetlejuice, where all of a sudden he switches over to, well, I went to Juilliard for 4 years, studied blah, 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 blah. I can turn my freaking head around, but he starts off with that, well, let me tell you.
Well, and when you did that, that just made me think of Dean Winchester when he's like, I'm an Aquarius and I enjoy long walks on the beach, or whatever it is that he says in that episode, right? And like, so the first time I was ever asked that in a job interview question, I had no idea where to start. And like looking back, like I can see, like, I mean, it was like maybe 2021, and like I could totally tell I was getting the like, oh, from the gentleman who ended up hiring me, right? And it was just like looking back, the most embarrassing answer, but I didn't have professional experience to go off of, and Google was definitely not what it is today.
Yeah.
And so like I've learned so much for how to answer that question for job interviews, because there's like a formula, right? So like I had prepped my friend with this ahead of time, and he's still like, he kind of like wandered around, and then like I kind of like, I mean, hey, good job, but like here's what I heard, and this is how you could reformat it. It was like, do you want to try again? And then he started over, and I just like hands off the key, because I was like taking notes and like of what he said, of what I thought, what to improve, and I was just like, hands down, you just told me about yourself. Like that was the most genuine, authentic. That's how I would describe you. Like he was able to nail it, but it took like 20 minutes, and then the pre-meeting prep to get there, and it should be
Wow.
such an easy thing.
We're with ourselves always. Why
But
don't we know ourselves?
I think what trips people up is like, who's your external audience? And what are they going to understand, and what do they want to hear?
Yeah.
And so, have you ever asked yourself, who am I?
All right. I think many, many, many times I've asked myself that. And it used to almost be an existential type of
It's Thursday. What are you doing with your life? Right? Like,
seriously, but this was like me at like, I don't know, 8 or 9 years old, where all of
wow.
a sudden I had a realization that I was me in this body, living this life, and it freaked me out. So, but
I
no,
don't
there's
think
been
you
many
remember when you
times.
gain consciousness as a
Yeah,
person. Like,
there's been many times, because what happens is that you have a tendency throughout your life to become different people, right? Oh, you're Patty's sister. Oh, you're Nathan's mom. Oh, you're Jackie, Joey's mom. Oh, you're Rick's wife. oh, you're the library lady. Oh, and so once again, it's the audience, right? Who is defining you. So you have all these separate individuals defining who they see you as. And then you take all that in, and then it's like, but that's not all I am. That's not
And I wonder
all of
if
it.
that's why, like in my early 20s, I went through a quarter life crisis. I, was single. I hadn't found a great, I had a job, but it was not my career, right? I wasn't quite sure what to do, after graduation and all this stuff. And I feel like I didn't have a role, so it felt like I didn't have an identity.
Ooh.
And it just shows like what we value in society because
Mhm.
that took me away from knowing myself, right? And instead I felt shame and like scrambling to find these roles to play externally so that I could have a about me section, right? Because like who are you if you're not in relation to someone else in our world? um
That's and that is what bothers me. That relation, that adjacency bothers me, that you have to be adjacent to something to be someone. I was actually doing something the other day and I can't remember what it was for, but it asked for a bio, and it's like it took me almost out of my body. I was like, I have to write about myself? Like, where do I start? What do I say? Who am I? Who am I for this audience? Like, what does this audience want to hear? Like, oh, I'm a crone and blah, blah, blah. Or do they want to hear, like, I've worked for the public library system for,
Yeah,
25
do they
years.
want to
Like,
know accomplishments and why they should listen
yeah,
to you, or do they really want to know who you are and why
right.
they
And
should listen to you?
so I still have not written it because it literally stopped me in my tracks.
Because
And
it's no different than tell me about yourself,
yeah,
right? Like
exactly. Exactly.
no, where I get infuriated by it is when someone goes missing or dies and they're like, "Oh, Sally, mother of 3 is missing." And it's like if she wasn't a mother of 3, would this not be on the news? Right? Like,
Right.
oh, if she wasn't someone's wife, if she wasn't someone's daughter, if we weren't someone's
Mhm.
son, like why when people go missing do we all of a sudden list the roles they play in other people's lives as though that makes their disappearance or death matter
Well,
more?
that's news PR. They want to get their
Well,
eyes on their channel. But I know
but people do that in day to day even without the
they
news,
do.
right?
They
Yeah.
do. They go, "Oh, and they had a child and now this happened." And it's like, well, it's
President of
still sad.
XYZ.
It's
Yeah.
no matter what. But, that is something cool. I mean, I think my mom had a pretty good, it was a lot of stuff that she did. But I remember in our dad's obituary, one line that I loved, and I think my sister might have written it. It was, he was a true mensch. And
Oh.
I mean, it just encapsulated him, and so what a lovely thing, right?
Yeah, I
Because
used
yeah.
to. Oh, sorry, go on.
No, no, it's just that while yes, he had done all these different things, he hadn't been doing those things for many years. He'd been retired for many years. So why even bring that stuff up? Why not say like like this is who this person was, like loved to write, loved his friends, a true mensch.
A true
So
mensch.
yeah.
When I supported the director at the library, one of my roles there was to read obituaries of former employees when they passed, to
Hmm.
gather to make sure that she knew or other people in the organization knew that they passed, and we would write a letter to the family, right, about what that person meant to the library. And so part of my job was reading obituaries, and these people had some of the best obituaries. Some of them have even had written books had books written about their lives, like just truly amazing women that was really inspiring to me. Like, gosh, I would want my obituary to read like this someday, right? And it wasn't the fact that she was a mother, daughter, wife, sister, friend that caught my eye, right? Like it was the other stuff, like you just said, that like encapsulated their personality. When I shared that with a friend, she's like, "Yeah, I got to attend like a former colleague's or a colleague's parent died, and they described her as having grace and grit. And I was like, oh, I feel like I know her. And I'm also going to steal that and live my life that way. But like, oh, like I want someone to describe me, not the role I played, but like what that meant to them. Like a friend's dad, they talked about his friendship with his best friend for like 3 sentences in a newspaper obituary. That's both
Yeah.
expensive, but also lets me know how good of a friend they were together and what
Yeah.
that person meant, right? Um, versus just
So,
saying,
sorry, go ahead.
oh, I would say versus just stating a role, right? Like it was more
Yeah.
descriptive.
So, how do you peel away those roles to get to who you actually are? And how much do those roles help create who you are?
Exactly. I feel like that's why we're in this web of a mess we get in society, is because so often the roles that we're in them because we value them, right? Or you would hope so for the majority of people that
Yes, and some people who truly value their roles and are, you know, that's how they see themselves is by their roles, is then they retire and die like
and
quickly.
and so like this concept of self, is it for the public or is it for you, right? Because we've talked about personality before, and that's a very
Mhm,
public persona, and it doesn't have to
mhm.
be permanent. So often we think it is when we don't realize that, it either one happened just organically, things just kind of stuck to us and we didn't notice, or we picked this personality when we were 12 and didn't know any better and have since forgot it was a conscious decision to always go for the joke, Tracy, and not be sincere enough or in the moment, right? Like that we can change personality. And a lot of these roles that we play, I feel like are an identity, right? So kind of an extension of personality. But is that who, like, when you think of the concept of myself and who am I? Like, do you think of mother just because you had children, or do you think of mother because you value nurturing and caretaking and
Yeah. Yeah.
developing and growing,
Mhm.
right? So you have to peel it back. It's like Shrek says, it's like layers of an onion. You gotta get to the values and the character traits and
Yeah, I've often said I would never not experience the things that I've experienced in my life, good and bad. Like I would never choose to say like, "Oh, please take this experience away so that then I didn't have to go through that." Because I feel that everything I've gone through, every experience, every role, every identity I've had is all in the big bowl of Amy, right?
so, but in the big bowl of Amy, so there's nothing you take away, because that's scary to our self-concept, is who would I be if I didn't have that,
But
right? Like our
isn't that
ego
part
wants to
of
protect that.
yeah, but isn't that part of that ego death? Like having the ego die is to strip that away? I think okay, wait a minute. I totally interrupted you, but I'm going to run with this. I'm just wondering if you can strip away the identities to just be like, "Oh, there you are." And then just like close it back up. Like,
Just kind of peek.
yeah.
Well, I was gonna say, okay, so there's nothing you take away. I never go to like, because in my head it happened, right? Like in terms of like the timeline of our life that we're on, this is the timeline I'm on. I can't take it away. Like I was handed this, and this was what I'm gonna do with it, right? But I would certainly go back and add experiences that I didn't have.
Oh, absolutely. I would add them too. And you know what else just came to me? What if the true me is the bowl,
You're
right?
the bull that's holding all the
The
experiences.
true me is the bowl and the experiences just go in the
See, and
bowl.
I picture my life as like the paper or the map, the old map paper that
Yeah.
the timeline's
Yeah.
like developing and being drawn on in real time, and I'm
Ooh,
just
I
like the
like
paper,
that.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh, well, okay, well, this is so not in order, but I love it. So, so many people ask me what the podcast is about. I don't know about you, but when I'm out and about and I do
Yeah.
happen to mention it, as proud as
Yeah.
I am of it, and they're like, "Oh, tell me about it." Mind blank. I have
Tell
no idea
me
what to
about
say.
it.
And I'm just
Well,
like, self-development, personal development, spirituality, metaphysics. I don't know. We do Tarot Tuesdays on Instagram. Like, I don't know what to say.
oh, sometimes it's Tarot Wednesdays or Thursdays.
Well, but like crafting this, like, I feel like it helped me describe it because I think officially we're under the self-improvement category, which I really hope, and some, it depends on which platform you use. I think some of them call it personal development, which I like so much better.
So much better.
But
Agreed.
I now kind of have a sentence, I have an about me, a tell me about yourself for the podcast all of a sudden. And it's,
share it.
This podcast was a way to help discover who you truly are.
100%. Absolutely.
Because
hands
to me,
down.
like going back to, what Rick had said, why do you want to, would you say improve yourself?
Improve. Why do you want to keep improving yourself? Yeah.
And I just keep coming back to like self-awareness is such a never ending journey. And that can either give you fear or excitement. I have both. And I view it instead as growth and like a growing into who I am, right? We both just listened. There's an Alan Watts lecture where he talks about self. And he talks about how people are to the earth as apples are to an apple tree. So an apple tree is appling and the earth is peopling.
Yeah, I love that. He's actually very funny.
Oh, he calls himself a stand-up philosopher. So stand-up comedians, stand-up philosophers are really big in the 60s and 70s, but he is very charming, very funny. But so I just pictured myself as just like, I'm just continuing to grow into myself. But unlike the apple, I get this great thing of consciousness and self-awareness. And so like, as much as you can take you out of you and spin it around and see it, I'll do that. But he talks about how like my pointer finger can touch everything but itself.
Yeah.
And so like how much self-awareness can you really have? How much of you can you take out and look at you?
You know what you're doing? You know what we're all doing?
What are we all doing?
Tracying.
I'm
aiming.
You're aiming. And we're all just the universe having a good time, according to Alan Watts.
Yeah.
It makes me think about, all these neuroscientists and people who study the brain. It just trips me the freak out because I'm like, the brain is studying the brain and then telling other brains how to brain better. Like
okay, I never got to that point. You just gave me full body chills. The brain is studying the brain. It's like the pointer finger touching itself.
Yeah, and
thank goodness I didn't meet you when I was 9 because it would just be one mind explosion after another.
Oh my God, Amy, the amount of conversations I've had with people in my life that were probably the last conversation, because like I will just say something and it's something that I've just been thinking about since I was 8 and nobody's found a way to rein it in. And I don't feel like I'm in a constant state of existential
dread or something.
Dread or just any existential space, but like I'll just say something and I'll realize in that moment, not everybody thinks of themselves from a self-awareness, self-improvement capacity, right? Or just like where they are on this spinning rock in space. And like I'll just see them drop into themselves. I'll be thinking, oh God, sorry, this wasn't the mood, this wasn't the place. Like it's Thursday. What are you doing with your life?
Giving someone an accidental mushroom or something.
I'll tell you what, though, the 2 most recent examples within 6 months of me having that conversation, their life was completely different. And I'm not taking credit, but I'm thinking that was a point in their timeline where their map went. But so, okay, so going back to, have you ever asked yourself, who am I? And waited for an answer. Not like just journaled it, not been like, oh my God, who am I? Right? Not from a shame perspective or a suddenly realizing where you are in life isn't where you want, but just like a genuine, like, oh, who am I?
I don't think I have, actually. I don't think I have.
Yeah, I saw this stuff.
Like the journaling, like just sitting in it.
Yeah, and just like meditating or doing that affirmation before bed, right? And letting your subconscious figure it out.
Yeah.
Just like over
Yeah.
a
So
couple of
have
series of
you?
nights. No, I think I'm going to. I think
I
I
like the way you said that. No.
I have intellectualized that to the point where I have a podcast about it, Amy. So yes, have I said it? Uh-huh. Have I like sat and just like asked myself with the curiosity I say I value, and without like an agenda of something to fix, improve, become?
Ooh,
Like,
that's a really good point. So to ask it with curiosity and neutrality.
yes, because so often when I'm truly questioning it or like trying to shape it or nurture it, grow it, step into
Mhm.
it, a lot of times it comes from comparison. I would call it inspiration, right? Or influence. There's certain mentors or other people who is like, I really like how that person's such a Libra. Like, I wish I could live more from that place than from a place of Virgo, right? And as great as it is to be like, I want to be more open and heart-centered, what if that's stepping away from who I really am and my gifts and what I bring, right? And instead like
Right.
trying to be something else. It's so often, why am I not that? And how do I get there? Or what's my block? And not just, but who are you? And maybe what are other people looking at you as and being like, oh, why aren't I more, like, I don't know. It's never just been, like you said, what do you call it? Neutrality
And
and
curiosity, both.
curiosity.
Hmm.
But then Alan Watts in this YouTube video, we'll have to link to it on our socials. He asked, "Where do you live?" He said, "So many of us identify as living in
Yeah,
our
yeah,
in our
yeah, that's
brain,
right.
in our
You
head,
did.
in this place above our neck." He said, "But some people do identify as living in their heart space." That a lot of Japanese and Chinese cultures,
Hmm.
some of these questions we ask ourselves in the Western world or how we identify is so far from how their society is, right? Like kids in America and the Western world would say, "Mom, how was I made?" And he said in a lot of Eastern cultures, they would never dare to say that, or like it would never deign to say that, not dare. Where in their mind, it's how did I grow? Because that's just the language that they use. Um, and so, yeah, in the language of like, where do I live in me? Or do you live in the cosmos, right? Like, are you not at all grounded? Are you like
Mhm.
up out there? Said a lot of people live in their solar plexus. Um, and so I think that's part of it too, is like, who am I and where do I really live? Like, maybe part of my problem is I keep forcing myself to live up above my neck, but where I really want to live is in my heart. And that's why I gravitate towards comparing myself to people who live from their heart space, is because my
Yeah.
true self is like, that's your home. Why don't we go home, Tracy?
Maybe even just take a little vacation there. Little
Just try
little
it
side
out,
trip. Just try it.
right? But so I don't know how much. Oh, we still got time. We're good. But
We
yeah,
got
because
time.
so I feel like when talking about like this concept of self, I think that language piece is so important. So like I said earlier, are you stepping back into yourself? Did you consciously move away from it? Or do you need to step into yourself in something you've never been able to be before? Um uh he talked a lot about
Oh, can I just say one thing? I feel like I need to get step back into myself before I can step forward into the next, like the next
you have
version
to
of
take
me.
you with you.
Yes. Yes.
We were talking was it the last episode 107 about how like I feel kind of stagnant and stuck on this path of life, and
Yeah.
it's like I just had to tell myself like, well, you're just repacking your rough sack.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like
In
so just
fact, I
Amy
just
make
made
make
that the
sure and
quote.
yeah, Amy, make sure you pack you in, in your sack before you go
Don't
forward.
forget yourself.
But so the language piece though, like when you're talking about self and like when as we talked about earlier, if you only come up with roles or if you start with roles, break that down into why those are important or what that means to you. I once had a friend who when she was going through a divorce with her husband, she was confused all of us around her, like this was the best thing that could have happened for either of them. It was not a healthy, good place. And she was just so confused because she's like, but we want the same things. We both want family. We both want this. We both want this. And I was like, I don't think you define those things the same way. I think how you
Oh,
define and view family is grossly different from how he defines and would be involved in family, right? Like he wants to have it as like a status thing and that it exists. He doesn't want to participate in it. And like you're picturing like two people and their, 2.5 children like bounding around the world in like this partnership. And he's picturing 16-hour days at work, right? And so it just pointed out like language is important and you can't presume even if you speak the same language, you're meaning the same things. Because
so
so going back to
true.
the Alan Watts video, he talks about how like I have, you say I have a heart, you don't say I am my heart. Um,
Oh,
right. And so there's like certain ways that we look at ourselves, like this is like when I talk about Tracy, I am a solid, but then I was like, oh, my stomach hurts. Or, oh, my heart is a flutter, not like I am my heart, I am a flutter, right? And there's like so
yes.
many things in us we consider as part of ourselves that we have zero control over, right? Like, even when I first started studying French and was going to travel to France, one of the things that my French instructor at Amity Aid, she impressed upon us is like, well, in France, you don't make an appointment, you take one. That they have a set number of appointments at certain times and they give you what they have available. Whereas in America, we view it much differently, right? And so over there, it's kind of rude to think that. But she also really struggled with the terms of like over here and over there and when they're different and when they're the same, because in their language, they don't have that. And so she would get really confused with how to use it when speaking English. And I thought that was so interesting because Alan Watts then said, like I as in myself, is a word of position like this or here.
Oh,
And so when you think
I
about that,
forgot that part because I did listen to it. I listened to the whole thing, but I don't remember that part.
I took notes. He has so many quotable things. We could do like 9 episodes on this 150-minute thing and still not reach his brilliance. So just I mean,
Yeah.
listen to us both. But like so there's just so many different things around language to play with when you're getting these responses if you meditate or if you journal on this question.
I love
Um
it that you said to play with and not to work with, that to play with as you're doing this. I think that'll make it not so heavy and not so hard to get started.
and so often in this self-improvement, personal development, self whatever kind of self-help kind of world, a lot of the people who are in this realm, myself included, there's like a seeking, wanting, yearning, right? There's
Mhm.
like something just on the just out of reach, right? Or on the tip of our tongue, and we don't know what it is. And we think if we're better, if we're more, if we're different, if we continue to grow and learn, we'll get there. And I don't think there is a there. I think that there's like an inner feeling space that fulfillment's never going to be outside of you, right? And so like you said, like play with this. It doesn't have to be concrete. It doesn't have to be defined. It can shape and mold. You don't have to share it with the outside world, right? You at least gotta
Right.
hold it.
And like you said, there doesn't have to be this end point. In fact, there shouldn't be. There shouldn't be a destination. It should always be a continuous, I don't want to say improvement, but a continual sort of playing with and experimenting with and curiosity with.
I love that. The experimenting with, because I feel like you're always being a version of yourself while
Mm-hmm.
continuing to meet and find these other facets.
Yeah. Yeah. Agreed.
So, oh God, there's so much with this. Um, I will say, like, for me, I think what I'm most trying to get to, one, like I've always felt really undefinable, and that it's made it a lonely experience because people want to pigeonhole you and define you, right? And like how many people get into um romantic relationships because in our society, at least in the Western world, that is where you get to be yourself. And I see all these girls on social media talk about how they just go into like gremlin goblin mode or whatever once they get in a long term relationship, get married, move in with a man or a partner, significant other, another woman, where they're just not like putting on these faces anymore, right? And their significant other most of the time still really loves them or loves them more for it. And it's just like you just they get to just exist. And like how beautiful that they found a way to a relationship where they can do that in the world, but like also how sad that you can't just exist
Right.
outside of finding your special
Yeah.
person.
Yeah.
And that's again why so many people are probably there's a lot of people my age who have never been in a long-term relationship or are not currently, and the dating landscape is bleak. And it's like, oh, will I ever just get to be myself around another person? So if you ask yourself that question of who am I, or as you go through like this finding your North Star or whatever you want to call it, like when you like, I view it as like, what's your true essence? And like, just let yourself experience it and then let yourself experience it more and more.
I love that. I do. And I am going to do that. And I hope the listener does that as well.
And
And
I want to
yeah,
loop it back to what we've been talking about all
yeah.
along. So this whole thing has just been like the myth of self, right? Like does it
Mhm.
exist? Do we exist outside of roles? Who are we? But
Yeah.
like on this hero's journey, does the hero ever identify themselves as a hero?
Not until
And
after the journey's done.
how many of them actually would at that point too? I mean, when we look at like how it's portrayed in media, Odysseus isn't walking around calling
Yeah,
himself a hero.
even
Dean and
if
Sam
you
Winchester do
know,
not see themselves as heroes.
even
And
when you see something where someone has like heroically pulled someone from, like lifted a car and gotten someone out from under, and they're like, you're a hero. And they're like, it's what anyone would do. So
right. So, like,
I
just
don't know.
remember that as you're on this path, you don't have to identify as anything. Like, just feel it, just be it.
Oh.
That's it. All right.
Well, all right. So I hope you all can just be it. And if this spoke to you, please give us some love. We appreciate that so much. And don't forget, you can always reach out to us. You can find us on Instagram and YouTube under The Brightly Podcast or via email at brightlypodcast@gmail.com.
And with that, we hope you have a bright and beautiful existential crisisy day. Okay, bye.
Bye.